Welcome back to Combat Mission, where we're going to have a look at reconnaissance, probably the most important thing you should be doing in any given battle at any given time. Realistically, the title should probably be ISR for Intelligence, Surveillance and Reconnaissance, because reconnaissance itself is a little bit more specific, but in general terms, this video is about collecting information on the battlefield. There are two things we really want to get information about. We want to know about the ground we're fighting over, and we want to know about the enemy. Luckily, one of these is much easier in-game than it is in reality. Finding out about the ground is a simple exercise in examining the map. We have full control over a camera in 3D space that we can fly wherever we like to get a handle on the terrain that we're going to be fighting over. In addition, the ground tiles and objects on the map have common traits. We don't need to send some scouts out to check what weight a bridge can carry or whether the undergrowth in a forest is passable to vehicles. It's the same every time. We can make accurate judgments just from looking at the terrain and applying a little experience. We can check other important elements like the weather and how wet the ground is from the Conditions tab. What to do with this kind of information about the ground is a different subject, but the lay of the land for every map is immediately available to us in as much detail as we want. That doesn't mean that ground reconnaissance is totally irrelevant. There is still value in getting troops to check how passable certain terrain features are, to get time distance data, or to get an idea of what fields of fire certain positions can provide. Less immediately available is information about the enemy, so the meat of reconnaissance and combat mission is focused on working out where the other guy is, what he's brought to the fight, and what he's doing with it. The most straightforward way to do this is to simply observe the enemy. Get your own units to positions with good lines of sight and start spotting enemy units. Any unit can do this, but some are better than others. The organisation of the unit's parent formation is important. Specific reconnaissance formations tend to be small and shallow so that information can move quickly from collection to dissemination. Special equipment like binoculars and night vision for low light conditions also provide advantages. Thermal images represent a significant increase in capability. Radios and other communications equipment are vital to get information into the C2 chain, where it can be distributed throughout a force. So vehicles, which can carry more powerful optical imaging and communications equipment, as well as being able to rapidly get in and out of position, tend to be effective reconnaissance assets. They're also bigger, louder and kick out more heat than dismounted infantry, so they're more likely to get spotted by the enemy in return, and obviously there are some types of terrain that vehicles simply cannot operate in. Depending on the circumstances, dismounted infantry may be more appropriate. What we're actually looking to discover are the locations of enemy positions, what troops, vehicles and weapon systems are in those positions, and from those details how the enemy intends to use them. This is where some technical knowledge comes into play. BTRs, BMPs and tanks are all vehicles, but they provide the enemy with very different capabilities. It's also worth noting that while directly spotting enemy units is always going to be preferable, getting incomplete visual contacts or getting sound contacts, especially at night, is still very useful. Spotting the enemy directly, though, can be very difficult. Not only is it generally quite slow, but an infantry team concealed in a building or a woodline is tough to spot, providing they stay still and hold their fire. So one way of boosting the chances of discovering enemy units is to provoke them into moving or shooting. This can be as simple as providing them with a target to shoot at, engaging suspicious pieces of terrain to see if they shoot back, or approaching potential positions to try and prompt the enemy into making a fight or flight decision. Obviously, it's important here to have mutually supporting elements so that one element can observe while another provokes, and to bear in mind that this can be incredibly risky for whichever lucky troops you send out for the express purpose of getting shot at. Having stronger forces, artillery or smoke on hand to help bail them out if it all goes wrong is generally a good idea. This kind of provocation can range in scale. Where some enemies might be willing to reveal their positions at the drop of a hat, others might not react unless they think they need to go all in. So at one end of the spectrum we have aggressive reconnaissance patrolling, at the other we have full-on simulated combined arms attacks to try and get the enemy to show their hand. These measures have the added benefit of working a lot faster than waiting to see if you're going to spot something that may or may not be there, and naturally, more aggressive reconnaissance measures might themselves create favourable conditions for further action. Punching a recce patrol forward to some key terrain only to discover that, for whatever reason, the enemy hasn't got it covered or occupied is as much of an opportunity to be exploited as a reconnaissance asset managing to catch an enemy unit at a disadvantage and destroy them. So we have a few ways of actually conducting ISR and combat mission. We can set up observation posts and watch the enemy, we can shoot at them or patrol towards them to see if they react, and we can ratchet up the pressure to provoke them into revealing more information than they might want. There are some other important considerations too. Firstly, reconnaissance should never stop. Obviously, the emphasis on reconnaissance can vary depending on the situation, but there should always be some kind of scouting, observation, or screening going on. The more you know about the enemy's forces, dispositions, and intentions at any stage of the battle, the more well equipped you are to deal with them, and the less likely the enemy is to surprise you. Hand in hand with this, reconnaissance is not the sole preserve of reconnaissance units. Reconnaissance is everyone's job, from battalion all the way down to individual squads. Specifically, tasking a third of your force to reconnaissance is a good benchmark, though this will depend on the terrain and conditions. It's also easy to associate reconnaissance with the attack. There's an implication of forward movement, of advancing in pursuit of information, but reconnaissance is just as important defensively. Knowing what the enemy is going to attack with and where he's going to attack is absolutely critical for the defender. But of course, if reconnaissance is vital for both attack and defense, then we have a situation where both sides will benefit if they can blind the other. For every reconnaissance effort, there is a counter-reconnaissance effort. Passive observation can be nullified by keeping units concealed or out of sight. Infantry and vehicles should ideally have both fighting positions that don't expose them to observation and hide positions where they can remain tucked away until they're needed. Another exercise in making reconnaissance more difficult is to simply deploy in depth. If the enemy main force is simply a long way behind an outpost line or security screen, reconnaissance forces are limited in what they can discover unless they manage to punch or infiltrate through. More actively, an aggressive counter-reconnaissance force can make information gathering very dangerous. Obvious observation points like tall buildings and the high ground can be mined, occupied by standing patrols, or pre-registered for fire. Other areas reconnaissance units might find attractive for setting up OPs or moving into, around and out of a zone of operations can be covered by patrols, outposts and ambushes, as well as obstructed by obstacles and minefields. In other words, there is a cat and mouse reconnaissance battle to be fought, which can always be spiced up by deception, trickery, and any and all other kinds of devious means of trying to control what the enemy learns for exploitation in the future. So, this has been a very quick, light overview of the subject of reconnaissance and combat mission. In short, the more you know the better, before and during whatever you're doing, and the more you stop the enemy from knowing, the more difficult you're going to make things for them. Hope you'll find this one useful, and I'll catch you in the next video.